Hi, everybody. So this is the Acom podcast, and I'm joined today by quite a few guests. I'm MZion as usual, and we have Spuds.
Yeah, I'm here, like always.
Um, we have a QM, QuestDrone,
Hello.
and we're also joined by Kaz and Catoplebus.
Ah, crap. 4 plebs is down. I was going to try and find the first thread of Dragon Quest, but oh well.
Dragon
Oh.
Quest isn't on 4 plebs either.
Yeah, at least. So as you can probably tell from this, at one point we're going to discuss something called Dragon Quest. But before we do that, I think we could go first chat with our first main guest, which is going to be QuestDrone. So QuestDrone, what do you run?
I run Hive Queen Quest, which is currently ongoing, and I had a very short experimental quest called Cyberpunk Detective, which I ran under a different trip.
Okay. Correct me if I'm wrong, but Hive Queen Quest is not super old, but it's like 2014-ish, I want to say, is when it started.
You're breaking up, MZ, again.
It is 2014. I'm speed reading through the
Yeah.
archive right now. Yep, it's 2014.
Yeah, I just checked. My first thread was back in 2014.
All right. So what's it about then?
Well, it more or less stars like the buggers from Ender's Game, like that type of a hive mind-esque insectoid alien. So the players just started as a hive queen, waking up in the middle of space in a little escape pod sized spaceship, and they got to pick a pick of 3 habitable planets that they were able to detect with their sensors. And that was their first decision. So they landed on their planet and they started making their hive, and now it's devolved into crazy realpolitik hijinks with other alien races and the humans and various elder beings from beyond known physics trying to murder them.
Okay. Now correct me if I'm wrong, but when I first because I used to follow your quest way back, but you did, I think, have a hiatus for a bit.
2 hiatuses, actually.
Okay. But if I'm not mistaken, you said you were inspired at one point by another TG quest, which is, I think, since ended, AI quest, right?
That is correct. That was the first quest I actually followed. There were the way back then. I remember there was one that was like some sort of villain quest, but I didn't really know what quests were at the time. I was just like, hey, they're not talking about traditional games. It looks like they're doing a traditional game. What's going on here? And I just kind of watched out of curiosity without really knowing what was happening. But like they were, I don't know. It looked like they were acting like some sort of Metal Gear Solid villain or something, which I know doesn't really narrow the list down any, but I didn't really know. But AI Quest was the first one I really read from the beginning.
Yeah. So Catboss brings up a really good point, but at one point in AI Quest, there was this guy called Fluffbringer, who is
Yeah, he reads mine.
I'd like to say he's like the patient zero for like the autistic sort of quest guy who comes into a quest and forces OCs and whatnot. You know, the sort of cancer player. We haven't seen many of those recently, but there are a couple naken. So
Well, honestly, the only real reason that people started hating him, the only reason he was a problem in AI Quest was because Program Zero made one of his stories canon and just gave it the stamp of approval. And that really pissed off all the players because there were a lot of people that did not like it.
if Deku's Magical Girl Noir quest taught us anything, it's that, accepting things like that, that sometimes leads to chaos and carnage. So
yeah, Yeah, in order to try to prevent that, I just have like a blanket policy of approaching like fanfic stuff with the mentality of like George Lucas, where it's like the thing I write in the quest is canon. If you want to make something canon, it can be like secondary canon. It's the expanded universe,
Yeah. Well,
which is useful because there's an entire fanfiction quest about my quest, actually.
oh, that's quite cool. What's that quest called?
Hive Queen Quest Beta. It actually started up during my first hiatus when my computer died and like fried itself, and I had to get a new one. And yeah, he started up there, and it was really funny because I had been gone for like a few weeks already when he started up, and everyone like ran into the quest and started celebrating, and then they realized, hey, wait a minute, this ain't a QuestDrone. What's going on here?
You've there are a couple of quests which have gotten knockoffs in that way. Like I know there's been like 50 billion Strike Witches quests, for an example, all based off the same one. And then there was Doppelganger Damacy, which I actually enjoyed mechanically. I'd like to see something like it again, but probably not gonna likely to happen.
Yeah, he really he doesn't. He kind of started back when I had a different system because I've gone through like probably 3 different mechanical systems by now. Uh, like I redo it every now and then when the players get to a certain point, and I just kind of step it up to a higher macro level.
Yeah, no, I've seen that if you look at like you go one every 25th thread, you see like the numbers just go up. And I was about to ask you how you handle like the greater scales that you operate in. Like at the first thread, it's just the Hive Queen, right? And then
Yeah,
it
the
goes up to
first
billions of ships or whatever.
yeah the first thread they start with just them, and their pod was technically also a drone because the whole point of the Hive race is everything that they make is a drone. All of their technology is biological, so their egg sac isn't just an egg sac. It's like a gene lab where they splice together genetic material in order to make their technology. So all their stuff is made of living matter, even if it like incorporates metal as reinforcement. So their little spaceship pod is like, mentally talking to them and asking if it did a good job, and it's like, oh yeah, we've landed, and so they get out, and so they only had like one drone at the time, and it was incapable of moving once it landed.
Uh,
And then after that, they had like smaller number of workers, and now I don't actually keep track of ground drones. That's how when I went up to the macro level, I just sort of made it so that uh, the planets that they colonize will automatically produce the drones it needs in order to run its infrastructure. So they have populations of just like millions, hundreds of millions, billions, however many they need. And I just consider it to just be there. So if like an enemy attacks there, it just has like shitloads of troops there already, and the players just get to determine like the strategy that is used.
But isn't there like an inherent complexity to a planet as a unit as opposed to to drones as a unit? Like having 20 drones is not as complex fort-wise as having 20 planets inherently, right?
Yeah, like at first I had the system set up where it's like, oh yeah, I'll just keep track of the buildings in the hive. Like, oh, they built this and that thing over there and whatever. And it very quickly became unfeasible, so I just kind of scrapped that. And now, any time they build a building, it's not just one; it's a planetary installation. So if they build the main defense for planets is the anti-orbital battery, which is just like skyscraper-sized particle beam that like shoots into orbit. And at first, I set it up so that you build one, and it's enough to cover a pretty decent area. and then I kind of like crunched a little bit of numbers on the side, and it's like, okay, you would need this many for an average, somewhat Earth-sized planet, and this many for an average moon-sized moon, and so I just kind of gave them that numbers, and now I translated that into a raw number and said, okay, so now it just costs this much for an anti-orbital battery network, and you only build the whole thing at once, and then this much for a moon.
Yeah, but even if what I meant is that even if you do that, even if you abstract, there's going to be like an inherent conceptual difference,
Oh,
which makes
absolutely.
the whole thing go in. It slows down eventually. Like
Oh, yeah,
even
absolutely.
because even if you have 20 numbers at the start, 20 worker drones at the start, that's still going to be much easier, and you have 20 planets at the end. 20 drones is much less complicated than 20 planets, no matter how much abstraction you do.
Well, like I've run quests that have similar escalation to that, and generally speaking, like you can like at the start, it's more anything else that it feels each individual action, like done by one drone, for example, matters a lot more than what you would have by let's say by the time you get to planet scale or something. Like the actions that each individual drone does on the planet scale is much less. So what you end up doing is you end up conceptualizing um, basically planets as sort of like a new unit or new area. So you can, yeah, but
That's what I meant. But
yeah,
the planet is even if you conceptualize it as a unit, like since the scales are different, the units are more complex. A planet will always be more complex than a drone, even if you're like conceptualizing them both as a single entity.
Yeah,
yeah,
although there is one benefit in that the planet is a more passive entity. With
yeah,
the drone, you have to give it orders, and it's like sitting idle. You have to give it something to do. But with the planet, it's just churning out resources and producing build queues, and that's all it really does. So it's a pure crunch thing. I don't really have to give it any screen time to
yeah,
like describe it building stuff. I mean, I'll do that as like background dressing sometimes, but at the end of
yeah.
the day, all it really does is a mechanical thing.
Yeah, like in one of the quests I did, um, it start like when you're doing something like on a very small scale, like person to person, you go sort of in depth, but then later when things start escalating, the numbers start getting exponential. You just say like X happened to this house, for example, and now that house does this, whereas before that would have been like a whole mini arc or something to do. It's sort of just like the only way to keep things like that focused. So otherwise you get too bogged down with mechanics. But what I wanted to ask you actually is when you first started the quest, sort of how experienced were you with quests in general? Because I know there are a lot of QMs who sort of don't know much about quests and sort of went straight into the deep end, so to speak. Do you think you were like that, or did you have a good idea?
Absolutely. I really had no idea what I was doing whatsoever.
Fair enough. Nice and honest. Um,
Looking back, I did a lot of things that I think were very stupid mistakes when I'm making a new quest. One was I didn't even have a Twitter, and like pretty much I read back my first thread, and I think, wow, it was a miracle that I got anyone in that thread.
Yeah, I don't know. I read your quest again like quite a lot at the start, and I have to say, as far as quests go by new QMs, it was quite good, honestly. I liked it quite a lot. I was sort of like inspired by it in some parts. So, all things considered, would you say that are you sort of happy with how everything turned out then?
Absolutely, I'm very happy with the way it's gone so far, and it's really hard to plan ahead when it comes to these types of things. I kind of don't even bother really. I kind of take I call it procedural DMing. It's how I run my game group for my friends.
Hmm.
Because the main experience in questing I personally get from just being a shitty writer as a hobby and being the DM for my game group, and those two skills come together with quests.
All right. So you think you basically do it a lot by the seat of your pants, basically?
I don't think there's a way not to, just because I've made the mistake of being like, okay, I'm going to plan this, and this is going to be really cool, and the players are going to love it. And then when it comes up, the players are just like, oh yeah, let's go down the hall this other way, and I'm just okay, just throw all that out.
So no, I'm just gathering information from other QMs, making sure that it's sort of like how every man drinks beer, but nobody really likes beer, and we all sort of pretend. I'm just making sure that everybody understands that all QMs basically have zero plans, and we just do shit by the seat of our pants. I'm reminded of that one GIF of Wallace and Gromit and
Oh, I love that one.
the dogs throwing down the train tracks as the train's chewing along.
I mean, there's some extreme. I mean, some people have less, some people have more, and then there are some like extreme outliers who literally have zero idea where they take that quest at all,
That's
and then
exactly how I run.
well, I mean, to some, not to that extent. I mean, you still had like you established your quest. Like you didn't just say, "Tell me what to write," like some people do. Like MZ did at one point, I think. Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah,
jeez.
my first quest was like it was a pretty big mess up. All things considered, like I don't know how it started because the first post of my first quest was here are some fetishes, which ones would you like? You know,
And I remember a discussion about some choose your own adventure type deal on Co, which was that someone had literally written out every single result for the entire quest from the very start and just came to Co to post the next net post every day. And that was the only writing he ever did after having pre-written the entire quest.
I think that for this is just my personal opinion, but for planning, I think that the best way to handle planning in quests is to have sort of like a few like key things that you sort of want to get have done like eventually and have them out there for the players to stumble across and every so often nudge them towards it. Like
Well, from what I've from what I've seen, quests do best when they're written like Stephen King writes his novels, which is there's a situation, it has all of these concepts or whatever, and then he just writes and it takes shape. And that's where when quests work best. When you have like a really strong initial situation, like my favorite quest of all time, Sexual Encounter Quest, which is you're a 27-year-old virgin math genius who really wants to get laid but doesn't really have the courage to.
yeah, I'm then going to spend money and own a PMC.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that wasn't the idea from the start, but that became like the situation, and then everything flowed from there. And it's when you have stuff like that then quests work best. When you have a situation and there's no real planning or plot, and it's all written based on this just makes sense sort of thing.
Yeah, you sort of need just the only thing a quest really needs is something to give motivation to the players. As long as there's something that the players can say, okay, we need to do X because Y is in this situation, then it's going to end up at having some sort of direction.
Yeah.
This subject sort of brings us to
Ooh.
Yeah,
There we
yeah.
go.
Now, this subject sort of brings us on to the quest you suggested we
Yeah.
discuss MZ.
So what I wanted to do was there was this one QM who runs an Acon who I'm a pretty big fan of actually. I think a lot of the work they do, it has some problems, but a lot of the time I enjoy how it goes. It's The Wanderer. Um, they have quite a few quests on Anonkun. My favorite is probably one called Broken, which I think is sadly discontinued, but it's about it has a very uh gosh, I can't remember the term for it. What's it called when in media res. There we go. Um
In the middle of things, yeah.
yeah. So to anybody who doesn't know what that sort of quest is, the main character basically wakes up in a mental asylum slash doctor's thing. We know roughly sort of how they feel about everything. You're like they get memories, for example, like when the doctors come, for example, they know that this could either mean pain or depending on who the doctor is, it could mean like happy fun times, etc. And the players are sort of left to figure out what happened to this character, who she is, and like what caused her to get into such a situation. Um, that's a really good read. I recommend it. But since it's discontinued, there's not much to talk about. What I did want to talk about was the quest that the Wanderer is currently running, which is called Eldritch Prophet Quest. Um,
Yeah, Eldritch Prophet quest. And it reminds me a lot of the quest that's probably the most popular of the ones you've always done, MZ, which is Depravity.
uh, Regarding popularity of my quests, that's a really weird thing. Like, it's difficult to say like which is the more popular. Like, I don't know, man. It's hard to pin down which is the most popular.
I mean, uh, but from when it comes to readers, I think Fad and Depravity was probably the two which had the most readers. I'm not entirely sure, but
Uh,
that's my impression.
from what I don't know, man. It's like a video game series or something. You know, the one quest, it's good, people like it and people support it, etc. You know, the next one comes out and all the fans and people who have heard of it join the next one, and that's bigger, but they leave it quicker, etc., etc. I think the one that had the highest peak was Path of Ascendance. Like that had the most concurrent readers at once. But I think right now it's the most popular is probably Fad. But anyway, yeah, you said it reminded you of Depravity.
Is this quest on Akun or QST?
It's a cut.
Aiken.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so what what I think of it is that it's like Depravity if you removed all of the silly shit and the humor, mostly. That's my impression from having read it a bit.
Yeah. It definitely comes across as more more serious in tone. Depravity was ended up by pure magic just being things that I liked, which is why it was very fun and entertaining to run. So that's why I'm also a fan of it. But yeah, as some people might not like, it's very serious, and the Elder God's kind of a dick. But you know,
Well, I honestly I thought it was boring
fair
because
enough.
uh, because the porn didn't appeal to me, and it doesn't have such a lot of other stuff. The characters are not strongly established. I mean, the interactions between them aren't that interesting. There isn't humor either, like there was in Depravity. So I don't exactly know, unless the porn catches you. I'm not sure what the appeal to it is.
Oh,
Well, I mean, yeah, that's sort of the whole point. I mean, these are both Spud quests, right?
yeah,
Yeah, so like it's like critiquing the plot of a porn film. It's not what people are going there for. It's just a vehicle to get to where they want.
But I mean, a lot of porn stuff has porn quests have really good stories, man. Like your BFQ is interesting in it. It has an interesting like hiding out in bunkers and nuclear god mages and so on. That's a fun. It's mechanically fun as well.
Yeah,
There's
but it's purely a bonus at that point because I mean it's still it's just a really good bonus that you have multiple things that are enjoyable. But at the end of the day, if it's a smut quest, like that's typically what at least a portion of the players come there for.
sure, but I mean, there's there's different amount. I can I cannot see the appeal of. I mean, I can't see any non-smart appeal in Eldritch Prophet. There are alternative smart quests which have better smart and also are just have better other stuff, are interesting in other ways, have character interactions or a plot or are funny.
Mm, I think those are, for parts of it, I think those are definitely fair criticisms. Um, Problem is that it does tend to focus on the scale of things, because it's very, focused on something happening over a long period of time, etc. Because it does skip around 3 years quite a bit. But I don't know. I think that he realized it, and a lot of the content towards the sort of latter third of the quest is focused on building character relations, which I think is a good turning point. But I do also agree with the fact that like a lot of the times with the smart quest, sometimes man, there's just some stuff you like, and there's not enough stuff about the stuff you like, if you get what I mean.
Your speech thing was flashing almost like you were winking, but whatever. Yeah.
Fair enough. Um, and I'll repeat myself then. It's like towards the latter third of the quest, he's really tried to assist in character interactions because I think he realized that's a bit of a weak point in the quest. But generally speaking, like sometimes you go there because there's certain smart you want to see done, and
Sure, sure.
yeah,
And there's a lot of input from players what sort of scenes are going to be written.
yeah,
And it's more interesting because it's in the context of the story rather than just being free floating.
it has quite a bit of a choice in how things go, and I do enjoy how the mechanics are interwoven. I like the idea of people becoming progressively more mutated as like they get closer to the evil Eldritch God. Um, yeah, that was just a short bit on like the Wanderer and Eldritch Prophet quest. It's not the perfect quest, but I'd recommend giving it a read just to see if you like it generally.
Yeah, I give it the review of surprisingly boring.
Fair enough. Fun fact about it is, I don't think it's the first time he tried it. I seem to remember like he first originally made the quest like a year or so ago, but then eventually got rid of it all, started it over again, and tried again, which I think was very it's a unique way of doing things, I suppose.
He deleted an old version of the same quest and then made a new one?
It was only a few updates in, um, but it's like a reboot basically.
All right, without having the old reboot in because I said he saw he'd done a reboot before, but then he'd gotten the exact same distance in both times, which is interesting.
Yeah. Fair enough. Um, so what I wanted to head back to actually was since you brought it up with Dragon Quest, and I think Kaz has got a little bit more reading before he can chime in on it, but I wanted to just chat about like old TG quests. Because like now that
Old
QST,
TG quests.
yeah, because now that QST is a thing, there are a load of I don't know. It feels like the
There's some
history
new
of
guys,
quests.
yeah.
Yeah. So I want to know what like aside from Dragon Quest, which we'll talk to later, what is your like what old TG quests do you really? Ah, sorry, my mistake.
I think that like the first quest type thing which was ever on TG, Drew the Lich, is something I recommend very strongly because it's short, sweet, it's funny in places. It's just a good time, you know? You ever read Drew the Lich? MZ?
My phone ran out of batteries. Sorry. Where did I?
You ever read? No, I said I liked the oldest quest kind of on TG, Drew the Lich. Have you ever read it?
No, I haven't. You say it's the first ever quest on TG then?
Basically, I don't think there's anything older. Drew the Lich. I think it's a 6 thread draw quest. It's it's I quite like it because it's very focused on the main character. There's not a lot of secondary cast. There is like secondary. There's no. I don't think there's any secondary cast at all, which participates in more than half the quest, which is only 6 threads after all. So it's all focused on the main character, which is Drew, who is called a lich,
Mm.
uh, who is a lich, and his thing is that he wants to be evil because he, but he can't really manage it, and he really tries, and then when he fails, he tries to do other things, but he fails at them as well, and eventually he just has enough and decides to do things his way. You know, it's a it's a common sort of story, but it's it's quite well done, and it's just a comfy quest, you know.
Comfy quests. Yeah, I know what you mean. Uh,
I'm not sure if there's an issue with my connection or yours, but I can't hear MC at all.
hmm.
You can't hear MC. Well, he's not talking that much. I don't know.
Well,
You can't
No,
hear
but
him.
like I see his little icon light up, like he's
Yeah,
talking.
no,
Or something.
it flashes sometimes, but he is not actually talking. I think it's because he doesn't have push to talk on, so it like picks up his breathing, but you can't really hear him.
Okay, okay. I heard you respond to him as if he said something, and I wasn't sure if I missed something.
You know, Spuds, I'm reading through that Lich thing, and it's not a quest as much as it is like, I don't know. It's like, because you're obviously not inserting yourself into this
No,
necromancer.
it's like a Lara quest.
Yeah, so yeah. And yeah, like you said, it's pretty comfy, lighthearted, and I'm actually getting a few chuckles out of it.
Yeah, so Draw the Lich is something everybody should read because it's quite well drawn as well. It's not lazily done in any respect. Otherwise, really old TG quests. There's uh, there's Dragon Quest, which we're going to discuss later. I mean, Doppelganger Damacy has no story. It has no characters. It basically has no plot. But I like it anyway because it's very pure.
Which quest?
Doppelganger Damacy. The idea was, yeah, no, the idea was that someone made a thread which was what what would happen if you had a character in 3.5 which had 10 in all of their attributes and no special abilities or anything, but if they ate something they could gain a single stat or special ability or skill or feat or whatever, and permanently. And then the next day, someone made a quest based on that idea, where you controlled a being like that dropped into a random city, and it was all driven by that concept of growing stronger in a mechanically objective way, because it was all run in 3.5. And the way he did it was interesting because he didn't do roll by roll inside the quest itself, because that never works very well. What he did was he took suggested strategies, like, and the level of health you would lose before attempting to run, and then he rolled the entire thing out himself, and it actually worked quite well, even though it could mean that there were long breaks if there was an especially long fight inside the quest. And then he wrote the whole thing up afterwards and made it flow naturally.
Okay. Well, one thing you did mention actually that I do want to chat about is Laro's quests. So one thing is, did you ever read his most popular one, which is going to be Hero Quest Reina?
I did read Rena.
Oh,
I've the problem I have with Rena is the same problem I've had with all of his other quests, which is I like the first few threads when his main character is independent. And then they gradually become more and more stupid, and also more and more reliant on the readers. In Rena, this is much more emphasized than it is in his other quests. Like, Rena loses her intellect at a dazzling pace, and she loses all of her personality in the bargain. So she's just a hollow shell wandering a world full of these, like, quite exaggerated characters.
no, I liked some of the characters.
No, I like some of the characters. I mean, they're exaggerate. I don't mean exaggerated in a bad way. They're like crazy
Yeah,
and excessive.
the like it's gonna sound awful
But
because I can't remember her name,
Rena,
but like
I
it's
quite
funny.
like I quite liked Rena in the first few threads, but eventually she lost all personality, and she
Yeah,
was just a vehicle for moving the camera of the players around, sort of.
I think that in that quest, like it had a very strong supporting cast. Like I actually can't remember her name because it's been ages, and I want to say Bridget, but I'm not sure. But the lesbian villain and
Monster Master or whatever.
yeah, and
There's like three of them.
yeah, and her family, I just thought they were quirky, but I thought they were very entertaining characters. But I think as the quest went on, it had this sort of like weird I don't know what to call it. It's sort of like Dark Horse syndrome, but turned up to 1,000. Because so everybody sort of seemed to want like the side characters were more interesting than the main character. So the main character sort of became like sort of lost their personality,
Well,
and it
the
became
thing is,
focused on
the
the
main
side ones.
character would have been interesting if she kept being like she was in the first two threads, when she actually had some agency of her own and actually had interests.
Hmm.
But I know Laro did it deliberately, and he did it deliberately again in Magic Academy to a lesser extent, but to much lesser extent, as a matter of they're it's incomparable, even though he mentioned it in Magical Academy that it would happen, like in the thread, as one of the consequences of using the Orb of Chaos, as it calls it. But the decreased ability of the main character to actually do anything was a big turnoff.
Yeah. Um. Fair enough. There was one quest that I did want to discuss actually, which is sort of very relevant to one of the guests we have now, and we did discuss it a bit earlier, but probably one of my favorite quests is AI Quest. Um, So yeah,
I've read that one.
yeah. It's a very popular, very old, well, not very old, but decently old quest about an AI waking up and then the associated mysteries going through it. And I think at one point it had a long hiatus, or twice actually. Am I right with that
Well,
quest?
I think I read the first thread or so and wasn't caught like I did every old TG quest, which I didn't read all out.
Yeah, I actually caught it, um, like about halfway through almost, like when they were a good ways in, and I thought it was really an interesting setup here, and I just went back and started archive binging.
Hmm. So I I don't know. I think it went under like 2 or 3 big hiatuses during the runtime of the whole thing. But
Yeah, I remember like in I think the first hiatus was when I actually started, and it was a big inspiration for me starting my own. And then when I had my hiatus, oddly enough, that's when AI Quest started up again. It was kind of funny.
almost like you're the same person. I'm just kidding. So all things considered, I think it was a very ambitious quest because the mechanic sections of it got really, really heavy at times. But I don't know, Quest, did you enjoy reading through it?
Yeah, I would recommend it. The ending, I guess, is a bit uh, divisive, but
So,
all in all, I'd recommend it.
I never actually read all the way through it, so I don't know what happens in the ending. Was it like bad?
Uh, I don't really want to mention it that much, but I guess people felt it was a bit rushed. Like they felt like the general complaint I heard from QDG back when it happened was that people felt like the QM kind of just showed back up and wrapped things up really quickly, and it didn't really feel 100% natural.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I think that's happened to quite a lot of quests. There are some QMs who sort of pop back just to finish what they started. Scorpion
Yeah,
Girl
I think
quest.
that's what Program Zero did. It's just he kind of ended the hiatus just to sort of finish it,
Yeah.
and people felt it was a little rushed. I will recommend it as a quest though.
I know that happened to quite a few. Like I know Scorpion Girl quest definitely did that. Definitely a couple of others too. So you'd recommend it. I agree. It's a fairly fun ride. And you can, as always, find these old TG quests on the SupTG archives for just because the like archive.mo and whatnot don't work anymore. So
Actually, it does. Archive.mo came back.
wait, what? When did this happen?
He installed a CAPTCHA because someone was like taking it down to the DDoS. So now there's a CAPTCHA in order to prevent that, I guess. So anytime you go to a .mo archive page, like anytime you access it at all, in any tab, you have to like do the CAPTCHA just because the DDoS was so bad, I guess.
Oh shit. Does it have the archives from all the way back?
Yeah, it even has like the QST archives from the very start of it.
Hmm. Damn, I actually did not know that. Huh. Oh, they changed to archived.moe.
Yeah, they
Moe.
did. They've always had archive.mo. Ever since they stopped. But have they started taking archives again? Yeah. Huh. I didn't know that
Yeah,
would happen. I know that for quite a long while they had done it so that it was just an old archive. Like they weren't archiving shit anymore because they didn't have the bandwidth. But if they've started again, that's interesting.
It doesn't
Well,
have such
what I
an
think happened, what I think the timeline is that it would under the old management, uh, they would just it would repeatedly crash because they had bandwidth issues, and they would just put up a picture of like Mo looking at his noose from The Simpsons, and then one day they just kind of ran out of money, bandwidth, and all that, just had to shut everything down, and so they just put up a picture of him hanging himself. And after that, somebody else sort of took it from them and said, "Hey, I'll do it," and he did it, and then he came under immediate DDoS attack. I don't know if it's just a Spurg who really hates QST because he immediately put up a QST archive, but it was under lockdown for a very long time, and now it's back.
That's actually really interesting. No,
Wait, they don't have a TG archive, looks like, at all.
they do, but I don't think you can search.
It might not be taking any more archives because it's quests are banned from TG now.
Yeah. Fucking rip TG.
Yeah, it's the whole thing. It seems like it's focused on quests, I guess. I'm not entirely sure, but that would be a pretty good way of cutting down on excessive bandwidth issues, I guess.
Alright, so TG is not searchable. So I can't. They don't. If they have the old Dragon Quest archive, you can't find it.
You could try 4plebs.
4plebs doesn't have it. I've tried it.
All right. Well, that's interesting to know. I actually had no idea Archive.mo did that. That's cool.
Well, so are we going to discuss Dragon Quest now?
Yeah, it
We're
seems like a
running
decent
out
way
of time.
to end the session.
Is this Dragon Quest or a quest about dragons?
This
Quest
is a
about
quest
dragons.
about dragons, yeah.
Okay, so it's unrelated to Dragon Quest.
Yes, it's not a fanfic quest.
So I have seen a Dragon Quest before.
I haven't seen that, but I bet there is. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if that was a Dragon quest about being a dragon in Dragon Quest.
I think we're getting a bit too meta.
But in any case, Dragon Quest is interesting because it's essentially two entirely different quests, starring the same character, which diverge. It starts as like an adventuring type deal where they come to this Freeport pirate type city, and they try and work against the politics, and they do shit for different people, and then they just leave it because they've gotten fucked, and then they build their own empire on an island and fortify it and get a cult and all of that, and it's basically two different quests, and it's very interesting the transition between the two as well.
Okay. Well, I read the start of it, and it's all right. I think it's the best written quest, but it's not the worst written quest. Would you say it gets better as it goes on?
I would very much say it gets better as it goes on. I would even say that the first 20, I'd say the first 5 threads are not interesting at all, almost. And then the next 15 after that are all right. And then at, what is it, thread 25 is when it actually gets pretty good.
Okay.
I mean, it's a good
Yeah,
if you
so
25
speaking of Dragon Quest, did it end properly,
to,
or is it one of those quests that
like,
the
what is the
QM just
last
gave
thread?
up?
59 is actually something I haven't really seen in a lot of other places. It's difficult to explain, mostly because it was so fucking long since I read Dragon Quest, because it's ancient. Well, it's one of those quests where the QM just gave up. The the last thread is just a completely normal thread, if I remember
Oh,
correctly. And then he immediately started, well, not immediately, but 4 months later he started another Dragon Quest, which was not very good, and died pretty fast as well.
so, but this is all old TG,
This is
like
ancient history at this point, basically. So
7 years ago now.
it started 7 years ago almost. It started uh, 6 years and 5 months ago, and it ended around 6 years ago.
Whew. So, would you say your favorite part of the quest is then?
I would say that it is Fred 26 until Fred 57.
Yeah.
I think you can almost just skip straight to those threads, but I'm not sure since, like I said, it was a long time ago I read it.
Hmm. All right.
I mean, there are some sort of story elements that are continuous. Like I remember that they took a really elaborate revenge against their major rival, which and some of the consequences of that continue into the second half. And there's also the reputations and the character is established and so on in the first half of the quest. But to some extent, I do think you can start at Fred 26 or whatever and just go from there.
Okay. Sort of like how you can start. I don't know. According to BioWare, you can apparently start Mass Effect at Mass Effect 3.
Yeah, I mean, kind of, or I'd say more like Mass Effect 2 maybe, but it's like the whole dealio is it's a pretty clean split around halfway in.
Okay. Well, that's a very interesting quest. I only read the start, but you've sort of convinced me to keep going and read the rest. I was gonna say though, it is coming up to the end of the podcast. So do you think we should wrap up there? Is there any last words about Dragon Quest?
I'd say it has something which you can't find anywhere else, but overall its quality is not the best. It's unique, but that doesn't mean it's good.
All right. Uh, so
I mean, the general impression that I've been getting from Dragon Quest so far, as I'm reading through it, is it's. I would say it's hard to read at first. Did anyone get that? It's hard to read a little
yeah,
bit.
I
Maybe,
see what you
yeah,
mean.
sure.
Like I have to manually force myself to read it. I mean, granted, the content seems to be interesting, but I'm trying to force myself to read this is kind of detracts from my reading enjoyment. You know?
I do think that that is a problem with the first thread, and it's not unfair at all to say. I think that's pretty universal, that initial struggle, and I think to some extent that struggle continues throughout the quest, even if it's reduced later on. Not just
So, so the writing style, I should, if I'm going to continue reading this, I should just expect the same writing style across all the threads.
uh, I mean, I think to some extent maybe.
All right. Hmm.
I mean, people don't change entirely. The writing style improved. Let me just say that, but it's not night and day. It's
All
still
right.
a bit of a struggle.
Maybe we can talk about writing styles. Hmm.
Yeah, that's a decent topic for next week.
Okay.
Um,
Yeah. All right. Writing styles for next week then.
yeah. So before we head off, why don't we just sound off and say who you are, what, and when your quest is next running. So, yeah. Anybody want to start?
I am Spuds of the Apocalypse. I run Dogs of War. There's not a lot of war going on so far. I've realized that I've my sessions are way too short. I run 2 to 3 hours every Sunday, and I just don't get a lot done. And I don't have the endurance to continue because at that point I'm just tuckered out, and I don't really know how to solve it. So this tomorrow or or the day after tomorrow, depending on you are in the world, I'm going to try and drink lots of coffee and hope that helps. And it'll probably be terrible, but it's the thing you do.
Fair enough. QuestDrone, do you want to go up next?
Yeah, I'm QuestDrone. I run Hive Queen Quest, and I'll probably be running next Sunday.
All right. Do you want to say anything, Kaz?
Okay. Sure. I'm Kaz. I run Devil Summoner Task Force 666 and Bladebound Retainer, and I'm planning to run Task Force 666 sometime this weekend to be determined. Probably either Saturday evening or Sunday morning.
All right. And I'm MZion. I run a lot of garbage quests, and I try to do them every day. Just look on Aiken, and you'll probably find me somewhere. All right. Well, thank you for listening, everyone, and thanks for joining me, my guests. I guess we'll end it here.
Hope you all have had a good time, yeah?
Have a good fucking weekend.
Yep.